All right. I think we're ready to get started. My name is Karen Mulhauser, and I am the chair of the Council of Chapters and Regions, and I want to welcome you all and thank you all for spending your Sunday with us in this way. When I walk into a room that's full of UNA members, I just know that I'm in good company, because the people who are attracted to be part of the United Nations Association are the people who have a heart like mine. You care about the rest of the world, you care about multilateralism, and so welcome. And I don't know if we have all of our states represented here, but we have a great number of them. There was a meeting of the steering committee last night, and I'd like to acknowledge all of if the members of the current steering committee could stand and just be recognized. And so these are people who know a little bit more about UNA because they are part of the leadership team. And now if the new steering committee members, which is some of you should remain standing, could also stand. So take a good look at them, find them, and give them advice that they can bring to the leadership decisions, and they'll be in touch with you. We have representatives from the steering committee representing all of the chapters around the country. And new this year, we have national members of UNA USA, and we have 3 representatives of the national, and maybe they could just stand because you are the new concept of UNA USA. There's Cole and, well, RJ. So thank you all. You all have your agendas in front of you. It's going to be a full couple of days. Today, this really is our conference. It's our conference because it was actually shaped by all of us. We earlier this year asked chapters to let us know what are the things that you need most in order to build your chapter to be a stronger chapter with regard to membership and education and advocacy and fundraising. And then you're going to learn more about how we set the whole agenda for this conference based on those capacity building needs. That's today's agenda. Tomorrow, the agenda is full of information about the issues that we work on and preparation for those of you who are staying for Day on the Hill. This is your exercise moment of the week. Could you stand if you're planning to stay and do advocacy work on Capitol Hill on Tuesday? Wow, that is wonderful. And because that's really an important part of our mission. It's why we exist. It's to educate and to advocate for the work of the UN. So I want to thank you all for coming. I want to give a huge shout out and thank to the National Education Association. There was a time, and it was my disarmament chapter of my life, when I had an office in this building. And from 1982 to 1988, provided at no cost by the National Education Association. And they emptied this building in '88 in order to renovate it. But I've maintained contact with people in NEA all of these years, and they are a wonderful partner for UNA because we're all about education. And so they have donated the use of this space to us. And that, that is a kind of sponsorship that is rare and wonderful. And is Jill in the room, Jill Christensen? Jill, she's the reason. And I'd like to ask Maury Kaufman to come up and make a few remarks. He's on the executive committee, He's actually from Michigan, and I don't know if you had a chance to meet our members from Michigan yet?
I did.
Okay.
Party on.
So Maury is on the executive committee of NEA, and he's here to give a more official welcome. So Maury Kaufman. Thank you, Maury.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. United Nations Association, good Sunday morning to you. Let's try that again. Good Sunday morning to you.
Good morning. Wow.
Let's get some energy in this room. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today, and thank you so much. My name is Maury Kaufman, and as a member of the NEA's Executive Committee, it certainly is an honor to be with you this morning. And on behalf of NEA President Dennis Van Roekel, Vice President Lily Eskelsen Garcia, our NEA Secretary-Treasurer Becky Pringle, as well as our 3 million members located in every state in this union, the District of Columbia, and education employees that are located on U.S. military bases around the globe, I certainly bring you warm greetings and regards. So I must admit, I was rather excited to receive the invitation to join you for this opening of the conference. You see, I've always had a personal goal to keep myself informed of international affairs and help wherever I could. Now, for me, this all started when I was in high school in a program you might know as Model United Nations. It was that very program that led to a university scholarship at Michigan State University, took me to law school to graduate with accolades in moot court, and now, today, has me with you in front of you at this very moment. And let me be clear, we are so pleased that the United Nations Association is here with us during these next 2 days. Your efforts resemble some of the highlights that NEA has pursued since our founding in 1857. And it was in 1920 that the NEA established its first international federation of teacher unions. Today, in the U.S. and in numerous countries across the globe, we are faced with many challenges that at times can appear insurmountable. But the reality is that it's those same challenges that brought you here today. It was your call to action. The NEA shares in that common thread of rising to the occasion to always do what is right and what is best. In 1948, a New York Times editorial praised the advocacy of the NEA for helping establish UNESCO, an effort that the NEA owned to ensure that education had its rightful place in the United Nations family as a foundational aspect of human rights, development, and democracy. 1 year later, NEA members organized more than 1,000 public events across the United States that help emphasize the importance of the United Nations and UNESCO. Now, fast forward to 1993, the NEA was a founding member of Education International, and NEA president at the time, Mary Futrell, was elected its first president. Today, that global union, Education International, is composed of more than 300 organizations in 172 nations. Proudly, our current president, Dennis Van Roekel, serves as the vice president of Education International as EI maintains strong connections with the UN Secretary General, his Education First initiative, as well as the leaders of UNESCO, UNICEF, and UN Women, amongst others. Now, the NEA's mission is to unite our members and the nation to fulfill the promise of a great public education to prepare every student to succeed in a diverse and interdependent world. We are deeply committed to educational equity to make sure that every student has access to a quality public education and has an environment where that student can thrive. And social justice? Social justice is woven into our organizational DNA. As we educate tomorrow's leaders in our classrooms, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about our member who is a classroom teacher, an education support professional, one of our members that is connected to higher education and our students, as well as our retirees who maintain their active membership and activism well beyond their years of active educational employment. Now, I also want to take a moment to emphasize some of our current international work here at the NEA. You see, the NEA continues to advocate around student achievement through participation in the international summits on the teaching profession, PISA, and other OECD education assessments. We work to address human rights treaties and their ratification. And of course, we fight for labor rights. Interventions with governments such as Nigeria, Bahrain, Turkey, and Argentina, just to name a few. We're also currently involved and immersed in the Unite for Quality Education campaign, shared through Education International. This is our push for progress with the Education for All and Millennium Development Goals, and to solidify that quality, free, government-provided education is an essential aspect of the Beyond 2015 goals. The fact that we still have 57 million children in the world who have never attended school is simply unacceptable to us. We, the NEA, we advocate for a standalone educational goal that recognizes education as the foundation for sustainable development. But all of this is only possible with your help. Now, admittedly, as I walked around the crowd this morning, I was very excited to see so many young faces in the crowd. And truly, the world of tomorrow is here in your hands today, calling for your social responsible actions to make the world a better place. Now, within the NEA, we too are placing a strong emphasis to meet the needs of our youngest members and trying to forge that wide path for their leadership. So as you gear up for what appears by the agenda to be a jam-packed conference over the next couple days, I hope that you will leave here feeling more empowered than ever before, knowing with greater intensity that it is up to you to lead the way. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning, and remember, no matter how far a person may go, the horizon is still way beyond you. Thank you, United Nations Association, and have a wonderful, wonderful conference. Thank you.
You're part of the tribe. Well done, well done. Exactly.
Oh, an apple for the teacher. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, and Maury, I was told, is the youngest member of the NEA Executive Committee, and he was telling me earlier how genuine he feels about what he just said, about how we are putting an emphasis on recruiting and involving younger people. And while I'm at it, I'm just looking at this table here. This is the Casa Mulhauser table. Will you stand? The people who slept on my floors and on my couches, and just a couple of days ago, 2 students from Minnesota needed a place to stay or they couldn't come. So I said, I've got a floor, you don't have to have a park bench. Anyway, so also Maury has been traveling. He told me he was in South Korea and Japan visiting NEA members who were in the military there. So the focus of NEA on international work is deep and genuine and has been there from the beginning. So I can't tell you how happy it is to be back in this building, and thank you again so much, Jill and Maury. I also want to introduce another sponsor, and this is a new partnership. Some of you have had a chance to know about the UN Credit Union. And if Ray Friday could come up and say a few words. This is a partnership that was negotiated in recent months. And here in DC, if you're still here on the 25th, there will be a formal launch of the partnership at the UN Foundation buildings. And so with us now is Ray Friday.
Kara, thank you very much for the introduction. I see Raymond up there.
it kind of gives me flashbacks of when I was growing up and I'd get in trouble with my mom and she'd say, Raymond, I'm going to send you to bed without food. So please, everyone call me Ray. Thank you again. On behalf of UNA USA Management Regional Council, chapter leaders, volunteers, and other distinguished guests, it's an honor to be here today at your annual meeting on behalf of the United Nations Federal Credit Union. As many of you know, the UNFCU officially welcomed UNA USA members this past February. We're very excited to ally with your association since our two organizations share the common purpose of advancing the United Nations and its causes around the world. Like yours, our roots go back to the UN's beginning. In 1947, we started with 13 UN staff members. Today, we service the financial needs of more than 100,000 members across the globe. In fact, we are the 27th largest credit union among nearly 6,700 credit unions in the U.S. What differentiates our products and services for our members is that we truly do understand the financial needs of the highly mobile international community that we serve. That's why we're the first financial institution to introduce credit cards with chip and PIN technology in the U.S. We also help members who are not U.S. citizens secure mortgages in the 50 states here in the United States. It is an amazing organization to have that kind of ability to help people secure mortgages in the U.S. Not many, if any, domestic lenders are able to do that for you. In fact, the branch that we're opening a couple blocks from here at 1775 Pennsylvania Avenue will specifically focus on mortgage, investment, insurance needs of our members in the Washington, D.C. area and beyond. We are thrilled about our expansion here to D.C. In fact, this was a launch in 8 years in the making. But we listened to all of our members, and the need for our financial services here in D.C. are great, and we intend to make sure that everyone who knows about us, that we take care of. I hope you'll come and visit us often. Consistent with our mission to serve the people who serve the world, we're always interested in learning how we can better serve all of our members. In addition to our unique products and services, UNFCU also has a strong commitment to social responsibility and supporting humanitarian causes that are aligned with the UN's Millennium Development Goals and post-2015 development agenda. One of the organizations we enthusiastically support is the UN Foundation's Girl Up. Last year, our President and CEO visited one of the joint programs with UNICEF in Liberia, and we are a proud sponsor of the Leadership Summit taking place next week. Pamela Agnon, our Senior Vice President of Retail Services, will also be speaking at the summit on financial literacy and women empowerment. Being a good citizen of the world is a common goal that our organizations share, from your global classrooms model UNs to our special networks of women and veterans. You are passionate about furthering the UN policy discussions globally and driving positive change. And we want to thank you for your UN advocacy. I look forward to meeting with you throughout your convention and learning how we can be of service to you. And once again, welcome to the UNFCU.
And now, I know some of you have been waiting to either meet or see by Skype Samantha Power, who is the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She, unfortunately, people in this room will know, the UN is busy these days. And so she's unable to join us live by Skype, but she did prepare some remarks for us. And so with the wonderful equipment here in the NEA buildings, we're going to be able to watch Samantha welcome us to this meeting. I've actually had it before she moved over to the UN. She was in the National Security Office in the White House, and so several of us got to work with her because her office was coordinating interagency work in the U.S. government on women, peace, and security. And this is one of the things that UNA Women cares about, and I don't know if she's going to mention it in her remarks, but she is very aware of our work, and we'll after we have tech help, she'll join us. So at this point, I want to turn it over to our Executive Director, Chris Watley, who's been with us for 9 months or so, a good gestation. And so this is his first UNA USA annual meeting, and I have to tell you, I've enjoyed working with all of our past executive directors, but these last months working with Chris have been wonderful, and he understands our needs, and he understands the importance of the national office recognizing the work of the chapters, because we are UNA, and he gets it. So Chris Watley.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen, and I want to add my thanks to NEA and UNFCU. We are absolutely fortunate to have such great sponsors who get it, who get what we are as a grassroots organization and want to invest in it. And I couldn't be more grateful for what they're doing for us. I also want to thank all of the steering committee who were working late into the night last night to help us get ready for the year going forward. And I want to thank the chapter presidents from across the country who've come here with your delegations, your membership. And I also want to thank first-time people who are coming to this conference, who are just taking an initial touch on UNA. A lot of them are student members and trying to figure out, is this a cause worthy of your activism? And I kind of want to speak to that question in that, we got a title here, Mobilizing for the World We Want, and there's a reason for that title. I mean, for us as an association and for this conference, we're marching towards something. On Tuesday, we're going to be on the Hill making the case for this cause that we're part of. But we're part of a whole network of Americans and a whole network of people around the world that are part of a UN effort that's going on more broadly. The UN's making a series of decisions right now that collectively will define what the world's going to look like in 2030. So the UN system itself is marching towards something, and we're going with them. But I do think we have to answer that question about whether we're worthy of your activism. For some of you, you've been involved with UNA for decades. You've been involved with the UN system for perhaps decades before that. This is a chapter of your life. And you might be wondering if that chapter of your life adds up to a book worth reading. And then for others, maybe your gateway to us was the same gateway as our NEA host. It was through the Model UN experience. It was part of who you were as a young person. It was equally defining to you personally, but you're trying to decide if there's a role for that activism, if there's a role for that connection in this new life that you're moving into in college or beyond. We've got to answer that for you. And we've got to earn that activism. So I want to touch upon just a few basic things about us and what I think defines us and what points to where our future may lie, a future that isn't for me to define as an executive director, not for a grassroots organization, it's for us to define collectively. Next slide, Shante, if you would. Oh, no, stay right there, stay right there. We got a curious name. We're the United Nations Association, so we are Americans who are associated with the United Nations. Tough thing to be. The United Nations itself is derided by a very large segment of the United States population. For the rest, invariably misunderstood. You're connecting yourself to something that is either viewed as problematic, maybe toxic in some circles of your own family or friendship circles, and in the other circles, which might be favorably disposed to it, their understanding of what it actually is or what it does is limited. You've made a tough choice to associate yourself with this, a powerful choice. I think it's something that speaks to something within you. And it's a tough thing, and that you're now this part of this United Nations Association. Even the association itself is misunderstood In some corners in the country, some of the people you come across are going to think you are the United Nations. You're part of the system. Some of the people who deride the United Nations have a political agenda against it. There are actually a couple of websites that list our chapters as UN offices. Ilza in Birmingham as a representative of the United Nations. No, she's not a representative of the United Nations. She's something better than that. She's not part of the United Nations. She's among a network of Americans who find that the United Nations enhances part of them. And why is that? Next slide, please. Well, we're inspired by a noble vision, the vision of the Charter itself, which to many of you are things that you can recite word and verse. But we're also inspired by a noble person. And I have to say, I need to dispel a little bit of urban myth about our association. I can go on YouTube and find lots of references of my predecessors, others, talking about our association being founded by Eleanor Roosevelt. It's not true. The truth's better than that. We were founded in 1943 by another person who had my title, who was busy doing policy work and policy advocacy, who was convening within the think tank space of the Carnegie Institution. It had been around for 10 years when she walked across United Nations Plaza, having served as an ambassador to the United Nations, having been an architect of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, having stood there sat at the desk of the US delegation in the General Assembly, as she's doing right there. She makes the choice to join an association that was 10 years old. Why? Because it wasn't a grassroots organization. It had done great policy work. It had done great convening. It had some touches to grassroots element to it, dating back to the League of Nations Association before it, but all of that had atrophied. And meanwhile, the political movements that would become the John Birch Society that had a specific agenda against the United Nations, the skepticism around multilateralism, the idea that maybe this is part of a global conspiracy of the left, or maybe this is a one world government that's on the rise. All of that misinformation was on the rise. She walked across the plaza to dispel that. The truth is better because she is not the architect of UNA. She's not the founder of UNA. She's the architect of our chapter network. She's the one who built it. I mean, most of you know that. Most of the chapters that are here have a founding myth that's true within them. They have a story of when she came to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, or when she came out to Iowa City. Those are true stories. I went to the archive in the New York Public Library, pulled all the letters she wrote to the staff in her time there. Those are true stories. That was her mission. Her goal was to create that grassroots network, to dispel the misinformation that existed at the time. And by the time she stepped down and soon passed away, she was chair of the board at the time after she served as a staffer, she had created a network with 45,000 Americans in it and 200 chapters, a network we're dying to rebuild. But it's a noble vision that brought her there. It's a noble purpose she pursued. And what she was after wasn't high-end policy dialogue, it was this. It was to create a network of Americans who connect themselves personally to the cause and the mission of the United Nations, to find something within it, for whatever reason, who have found something within the UN itself, within the mission, within the work, within the impact of the UN, that connected with their system of belief. And what is that system? Next slide, please. 3 basic pillars to the UN system, and we have so many UN veterans that I feel guilty even trying to enumerate them because there are better people to do it. But what is the most basic one, probably, for everybody? The pillar of peace within the UN. And that language at the top of the slide is going to be really familiar to most of you. To save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. You know, it's founded in 1945, 80 million people dying in World War II, an equal number on the roads of Europe, displaced people moving from countries that no longer existed to new borders. The Nuremberg trials about to begin as a result of the Holocaust. That was the founding vision. That's the nobility that I think connects to many of our members still. That's also the disappointment that guides so much of the misunderstanding of the UN system in the public. Because it's a noble, beautiful, huge, and ambitious aspiration. Save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. You named that out in 1945, and God bless, I can see why you make that your aspiration, but we've had a lot of scourges of war since. We do to this day. And as a result, I would say 90% of the public perception of the UN is defined by whatever happens in the Security Council. We know that there's a horrific conflict somewhere in Syria, a threat in the Ukraine. You see the Security Council try to step up to the plate, can't get unanimity between the permanent five, and as a result, you have this sense of it being inadequate, failing to meet that aspiration. But meanwhile, it's advancing it. That what you're seeing right there is the Security Council vote on the Syria resolution to defang the chemical arsenal of the Syrian government after the horrific attack back this fall. Our association was there in that moment. 70 of our chapter leaders came together to help form a policy statement that endorsed the very thing that they voted on in the Security Council. Is this sufficient? No. We still should be shocked by the conflicts that exist in the world today. We still should be asking more of the UN system to live up to its aspiration of saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. But are they fighting against the scourge of war? Yes. Are they playing a dispositive role in key corners of the world and making life safer for millions? Yes. Is it horrific that the worst conflict in the world is churning beneath us right now with no easy end in sight in Syria? Yes. Is it better that Syria doesn't have a chemical arsenal? Yes, it is. Would that happen without the UN? No. That's an element of belief that I think connects to all of us, and that we have a sophisticated ability to see beyond the frustration with the UN's inability to act, to solve all the scourges of war, but to see within it what it does to address so much that could be worse. Next slide, please. Other pillars of the UN system: peace, human rights. Obviously, this is a key one when we have Eleanor Roosevelt as such a key leader within our history, one of the architects of the Universal Declaration, and that's some of the most beautiful language from it. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and human rights. Once again, the public perception around the role of the UN in human rights, it's defined by what's going on in the Human Rights Council or the Commission before it. It's defined by who's actually been voted onto the body. Are they the Syrias or the old Libyas of the day? Is it a human rights perpetrator who is at the table pronouncing on our own track record in gender equity or some other aspect of American policy and civil liberties and civil rights? It's viewed as this entity that is so deeply problematic that in some circles who don't understand what the UN does, there's this sense that it lacks the ability to perform its role in protecting basic human rights. But meanwhile, you've got a man in his early 70s, grew up in a very conservative South Korea coming out of war, who has made LGBT rights as a basic human rights principle within the UN one of his signature issues, has advanced it. The whole UN system has played a key role in connecting what is a huge trend line globally, with some reversals in many parts of the world, but globally, towards acknowledging LGBT rights as basic human rights. He was there in Sochi, delivering a speech on LGBT rights, back when we thought Russia's LGBT laws and lack of protections for LGBT individuals were our biggest problem with Russia. He was making that statement. Most controversial thing you could do before Ukraine fell, or the Crimea fell, excuse me. Next slide. And development. The pillars are peace, human rights, and development. Most people don't even know there's this development end of the United Nations, that people like Herb Bairstock, who made a whole career working in the UN Development Program, are out there changing lives and impacting millions of people through the investments that the UN makes in convening and setting global norms for what our goals should be in addressing horrible things like extreme poverty or polio, and then being on the ground and implementing as well. We know because 40 of our chapters were participated in those 12 events there. We know because we've taken the time to figure out that were it not for the Millennium Development Goals and the power that had to take a development assistance world that I knew in the 90s when I was working in places like Liberia that was spraying water like a sprinkler on a fire. You know, the Cold War ended, but the world was still on fire back then. And we were just dusting it with just a smattering of water across dozens and dozens and dozens of priorities defined by individual nations, by the Brits doing their thing, the Americans doing ours. They channeled that into 8 priorities, saw success and results, and then more donors started investing. The Gates Foundations of the world, the individual donors started changing their behavior, investing more money because they saw results. 1 billion people saved from extreme poverty, tens of millions more from HIV, from polio, from measles. That's because of what the UN has accomplished. We know that. We connect to that, and that touches something in our system of belief. We also know there's a lot more to go. It's why so many of us, 1,200 Americans roughly, participated in our post-2015 sessions. And what I'm learning from just talking to you is thousands more out in the chapters beyond that, going up on your own chapter events, going on the My World website, taking a stand in this and connecting themselves because we believe in that. We believe in these components of the UN system. Next slide. So we're still part of a fight. We're part of a couple of fights. The fight that Eleanor Roosevelt walked across the United Nations Plaza to fight was what the UN is. She was living in an age in which there was an information vacuum. You couldn't download the presentations of delegates at the General Assembly. You couldn't research the charter. If somebody came into your neighborhood and told you what the UN isn't, you were likely to believe it because no one was there to tell you what it was. It was a huge fight. That exact sign, which still exists in corners of the country, and I've been told by many chapter leaders they see it, that's an old John Birch Society motto. It was one of their founding themes from 1958, still around, but largely dispelled. Dispelled for a reason. Next slide. We've been part of that from the beginning. It's why Eleanor Roosevelt marched across. She created the chapter network. It's why Model UN has been so dispositive. When you have 100,000 kids a year who are going through this experience, who have a sense exactly of what the UN is because they've lived it, they've experienced it, they've been in their own committee rooms, they've seen the power of moving towards the deal and compromise over resolutions. We've won that victory in part because our chapters are out there every day in events across the country. UN Day itself with 100+ events around the country. We've been part of this victory. Next slide. And it's a cautious victory, but it is a victory won. That's the Better World Campaign's recent poll figure, but Wall Street Journal, if you don't like what we've done in our polling, Wall Street Journal has about the same number. 73% of Americans have at least a begrudging appreciation of the importance of the United Nations for American foreign policy. At least 73% ultimately, somewhere in some way, think that the UN is good for us as well as good for the world. So that challenge, that fight of making the case for what the UN is, we're always going to need to reinforce it, we're always going to need to make it. But it, by and large, is a fight that we've won. Next slide. But it's not over with that. While there might be 70% of the public who see some role for the UN, who thinks that it shouldn't just slough off into the East River and float out into the sea, the actual knowledge of what the UN does, what impact it's having is minimal. And the resistance to the United States playing the role it has to in ensuring that all those impacts there, the writing's a little tough, but the millions of people who depend on food assistance from the World Food Program and other UN basic humanitarian assistance programs, 100 million a day, You know, the World Food Program, we provide about 40% of the budget for it, always under threat. So 40 million of those 100 million depend on our leadership, depend on a specific understanding of that. Next slide, please. And that means that we have to take the time to make the case for what the UN does, and there's a whole variety of causes that we're behind. Listed here are lots of different things that connect to our existing advocacy priorities, that exist to events that your chapters are part of, or partnerships. We have UNESCO champions who've joined us for this meeting. We have those for whom gender equity is the biggest, most passionate issue for them. There are lots of things in our set of advocacy that connect to our passions, that we have to take that passion and make it part of our advocacy agenda and make it part of the DNA of our activities as grassroots leaders. But there's more than just that. Shantae? You see, all of those other causes, as critical as they are causes in which we are part of a chorus. When it comes to human trafficking, an issue I am personally very motivated by and inspired by what our chapters are doing, working with state and local law enforcement, partnering with other NGOs. We're doing amazing work there. We got to do more. There's a lot of work that needs to be done at the federal level. But if we were to drop off tomorrow, if there were to be no UNA, there are other people. There are other tenors in the chorus to sing. But when it comes to peacekeeping, we're singing solo. The slides you see, in the Central African Republic, where the Security Council approved a peacekeeping mission just about a month ago, and there is no funding for it in Congress right now, that we are on the verge of going $700 million into arrears on peacekeeping because we didn't fund the Mali mission last year. The slide you see is the Bangui airport. 100,000 refugees piled into that airport, living underneath derelict airplanes, living in hangars, living on the perimeter. Nearly half the country's displaced at this point. An active genocide was underway until a small French intervention force with some other partners from Africa and Europe came in and at least held the line, but they're barely holding it. Right now, the displaced population is largely in makeshift camps like that, like the airport, the largest one. They're also sheltering in churches. The Catholic Church has been good at sheltering both Muslims and Christians because it is a sectarian divide. Last Thursday, one of the largest churches in Bangui was broken into by a militia. They shot the priest. They shot 30 of the refugees, both Muslim and Christian, and they dragged away 27 others. All of that's going to keep going unless the peacekeeping force gets there. There isn't enough force on the ground to even hold the airport camp. We're accountable for that. I mean, ultimately, if we are the only grassroots advocate for it, if we're the only people who will ever walk through a member of Congress's office and say, I care about the boy in Bangui, that I'm making the case for peacekeeping. I'm making the case for funding the Central African Republic peacekeeping mission. Because without me, without us, we can't guarantee their safety. That's a powerful responsibility. I mean, many of you are deeply engaged in the history of the UN system and it meeting its failures. You know, I myself was coming out of grad school when Rwanda was happening, when Srebrenica was happening, was shocked by the UN's failure, was hopeful by what our own Ambassador Power, and many others put forward in intellectual leadership around responsibility to protect. The UN accepts its responsibility to protect in the Central African Republic. But we've got to accept our responsibility as a UN member state to step up. And for us as a grassroots organization, we have a unique responsibility when we own it, when we're the only voice singing the song. We're not part of a chorus. Last slide. And I'm going to end it there, in that we are an amazing organization. 70 years, large periods of great neglect focused on the chapters, and yet they still persist. I mean, that's really seven generations in the life of a grassroots movement or a grassroots association, because you're lucky to have any leader for 10 years. 7 generations have come through the United Nations Association, largely self-directed, coming up with great events, sustaining their chapters by the virtue of their own entrepreneurship. by their passion and commitment to the ideas that underpin it. I think we're more than an association. I think we're a movement. And I think that's a great thing. Associations are about providing information. Associations are a mid-20th century model dependent on the information vacuum. It's about a newsletter, it's about a magazine, it's about telling somebody about something. Movements are about connecting people to something. And we have that ability now. Thank you.
I hope so.
Well, I can't take full credit for him, but I did interview him when we were seeking an executive director, so I gave him the thumbs up. Because, as you could hear, he really does understand the value of the chapters and the grassroots. And no matter how strong the Better World Campaign's Washington presence and the United Nations presence on Capitol Hill is, without us, their message can be lost. And so let's applaud us. And I know Samantha would like to do that. Is she with us? Okay. Well, I'll just give another little story about Samantha. I met her before Barack Obama was elected, and she was working in his campaign. And I actually had the privilege of introducing her to speak about that campaign. And she told me that, she wrote this awesome book about genocide. I mean, it's a terrible book, but it's so well written. And when she heard that Senator Barack Obama had taken that book with him over the Christmas holidays to read it on the beach, she said, I got to meet this man. And so she called up his office and asked if she came to Washington, could she meet with him? And she was expecting, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. 3 hours later, they were still talking. And she told me that this is maybe the smartest man I've ever talked to about this issue of genocide. He asked all the right questions. He understood the answers. And so at the end of the 3 hours, she said, and I may have gotten this wrong, maybe it was only 2.5, I don't know. She said, if I quit my job at Harvard, can I come and be an intern in your office? And she actually then came and worked and helped advise him when he was a senator on the issues that we care about. So she's certainly the right person for the job at the UN now. There was a recent article in the Washington Post by George Will just saying that the United Nations was an insignificant institution, and suggested that we have our op-ed as a counter to that. And Amy? I think it's a great idea, because and as a model for around the country, when there is something that's in your local paper that needs to have a counter, our voice is the one that can help. And Chris, I don't know if you want to introduce the rest of your staff, but there is somebody in the back who's at your service for times like that.
No, well, first of all, Olga, that's a great suggestion. And what I would also recommend, if you yourself would like to, and would others, on Monday when Ambassador Pickering speaks to us, make that suggestion to him as well. That kind of response should ideally come from him. He's still very much part of our leadership network. And as much as I would love to have a byline, I would much rather have it run with someone like Ambassador Pickering. Yes, exactly. And he's the former ambassador.
Maybe he's writing it now.
I do. Before we take the next question, because there was a mention made to Amy on our staff, and one thing I was utterly remiss in doing in the confusion over whether Samantha Power was going to run or not, is I wanted to open by introducing our staff. Many of you know them, but some of you are brand new. They're not all in the room. If you're here in the room, can you stand in the back? Amy, Monica. I'm just going to briefly give some background. We have Ryan Kaminsky on my left, who is our Human Rights Fellow, who has launched 5 separate universal periodic reviews across the nation over the last 6 weeks to make sure that individual Americans have their say in the permanent record that the U.S. will have on its periodic review in Geneva. So connecting Americans to that human rights experience. We've got Renee Trainer. She is our social media guru. On UN Day this past year, she came up with a BuzzFeed list that trended for a while, that got retweeted by Ban Ki-moon himself and by Mia Farrow on top of it. She is a truly creative and inspirational colleague to work with on social media and a resource to all of you. Next to Renee is Troy Wolf, who's the head of education programs for the United Nations Association. Troy has been the quarterback behind our efforts to not only conduct great MUN conferences, but to find a way into the circle of relevance to millions of students in the classroom. And next to him is the newest member of our team, Wes Rogerson. Exactly. A veteran MUNer himself. He interned for us. He was so great that, as you know, you try to hire the great interns when they come through. And he's a resource in customer service, both for chapters, but also in our education work, because he holds both of those competencies. And then you're going to hear a lot from Monica. Monica in the back there is going to be talking to us at lunch. She is the architect of our youth outreach strategy. And right now our membership has doubled because of youth outreach, and I'm just deeply grateful for all of her efforts. And next to Monica is Amy Augustin, who also is new to our staff. Amy joined us from the World Food Program. She's based in New York. We stole her from a UN entity because we've got to be connected into the UN. And she has already done amazing things for us. In fact, she ferreted out what the UN Day theme is going to be for this year. The UN usually doesn't tell us until maybe 2 weeks out, but she's already burrowed her way into the system, and we'll talk about that later. But I have an amazing team, and one person who is not in here, who is absolutely probably the reason that the UNA itself is financially sustainable, is Mary Frances Wayne, our Deputy Executive Director, the best development professional I've worked with in my life. And with that, let's go back, let's resume the questions, thanks.
Unless Samantha is...
Are we ready?
Oh, I'll just add that. Okay, ready? Welcome. It's not too often these days that I get to speak to a room full of allies, so I'm especially sorry that I can't be here with you all in person. Let me start by saying how much I love the title you've chosen for your meeting, Mobilizing for the World We Want. It goes to the heart of the model of change that I believe in, and one the Obama administration has embraced and promoted here in the United States and abroad. It's a model that recognizes the power of the individual and groups like UNA, USA, to shape the world we want rather than accept the one we have. We need people like you to educate and engage fellow citizens in tackling global challenges. As you all know very well, many Americans have no idea what the MDGs and the post-2015 agenda are, much less feel like they have a stake in them. They don't know that they are about nations and citizens working together to advance fundamental human rights, from reducing poverty to giving people access to better schools and health, and from addressing climate change to making sure that girls have the same educational opportunities as boys. And if people don't know about these efforts, how can they help make these noble aspirations a reality? But thanks to your hard work, more Americans will know about these efforts, and more will be empowered to take part. Let me also congratulate you on your growing and proactive membership. If we could recruit UN peacekeepers as fast as you all recruit members, we'd be in great shape. Now, I'd like to use my time today to talk to you all about an issue that's a top priority for the administration in which I serve, and also central to the work of the United Nations, the crisis in the Central African Republic. I've traveled to many places that have suffered mass atrocities, but my recent visits to the Central African Republic have been among the most chilling because of the rage and the terror felt by so many, and because of the explicit determination of some to target people who were once their neighbors. In December, I met with Muslim families living in makeshift camps. Forced from their homes by homicidal mobs, they were living in filth without sanitation or access to medical care, and they were terrified. They told me they would rather live in misery than return home where they knew they would be killed. I met with a Christian so-called human rights lawyer who told me he wanted to join a militia so he could go and kill Muslims. When I asked why, he responded, "Have you ever watched your family be killed?" He hadn't either, but he knew people who had, and that was enough for him. The Obama administration has used a range of tools to try to prevent more atrocities from occurring in the Central African Republic. We've imposed targeted economic sanctions and exerted pressure at the highest diplomatic levels. We've helped create a commission of inquiry to foster accountability, and we have lifted and equipped many of the African Union troops who are the backbone of the peacekeeping operation there. On my most recent trip to the Central African Republic at the end of April, I met with some of those peacekeepers and got to thank them for their efforts to disarm militias and protect civilians. Of course, their record has not been perfect, including some very troubling recent reports of abuses, which we are pressing aggressively to have investigated and punished. But I told them, and I tell you today, that as terrible as the situation in the Central African Republic is, and it is terrible, it would be far worse if not for their efforts. In September, African Union peacekeepers will hand over their mission to the United Nations. But here's the challenge. UN peacekeepers are engaged in more places, with more troops, and with stronger mandates than ever before in the history of the United Nations. Yet even before they take over in the Central African Republic, they are being forced to operate with fewer resources than they need to succeed. And success in this context translates directly into saving lives. So the challenge that we face, and I say we because I put myself alongside all of you in this, is to persuade people in governments and in multilateral institutions, in high school and colleges and in local communities, of the importance of giving peacekeeping missions the support that they need. To make them see the human costs if these missions cannot fulfill their mandates, and to make them understand that they should not only support this effort because it's the right thing to do, but also because it is in our national interest to promote stability, avoid ballooning humanitarian costs, and prevent the entrenchment of terrorist groups who have a track record of taking advantage of mass violence. The people who are protected by UN peacekeeping missions, people in places like the Central African Republic, like South Sudan, like Mali, they may never know of the effort that you've made on their behalf. But if you succeed, they will be much better off for it. And together, we will have come one step closer to mobilizing for the world we want. Thank you, and good luck.
Well, Eleanor Roosevelt would sure be proud. And I want to thank whoever solved the tech problems, and we're very grateful for that because I would have hated to miss that. Had she been live, we were going to be able to ask some questions, but unfortunately, she's taking care of business. But are there any further questions or comments in reaction to Ambassador Power's remarks? Yes, and do we now have microphones? I think.
I can project.
Yes, you can. He's projecting.
The question I would have for Ambassador Power was that our former senator in Wisconsin, Russ Feingold, I'd be happy to. I'm Gary Shulman, president of the Greater Milwaukee UNA. We had a senator from Wisconsin named Russ Feingold who formerly served on the Senate Foreign Relations African Affairs Committee and unfortunately lost the 2010 election to an unnamed senator, I don't know. But Senator Feingold has been appointed to a special post for African affairs. And Ambassador Power didn't mention this operation, but I suspect he's a troubleshooter. So does anybody know how Senator Feingold's mission is doing in Africa?
Anyone in the audience?
It's a great question for us on Monday, or actually tonight with Peter Yo at the UN Foundation. That's a great subject. We can get you an answer on that. So, before we move on to the next question, I am deeply remiss in that there are two great members of my staff who I didn't introduce because they weren't in my line of sight. Shantae, who was busy getting Samantha Power up on the screen, she started on the same day I did. We were in the same new employee orientation class and has been a delight to work with, who works directly with the chapters as our chapter liaison, but was also on the road with me on our post-2015 roadshow, which I think for both of us was the thing that really ingrained our passion for this organization. And then Laura, who works absolutely tirelessly, who sits about 8 feet away from me and who I'm constantly over to her desk working to try to solve our various challenges as a chapter-based organization, but who's doing it with about half the staff that the old UNA did at its highlight, but with twice the membership. So Laura is a fantastic resource, and she's off doing the good work of the association.
We'd been paying attention to Shantae all morning, so it was like she was introduced. So she is a great resource in the office. Are there other questions? Yes, in the back, and introduce yourself, please.
Bill Haas, it's a little loud, isn't it? Bill Haas, I'm president of the Southwestern Connecticut chapter. I just wanted to say Chris gave a great speech, and I've been involved with doing these speaking engagements too, and I think it's a wonderful thing that he's doing. I also wondered if it'd be possible to get an ambassador of power. I'm just going to forget using this. I'll try to project. If we could get if the UNA and the UN Foundation could help arrange for speeches by Ambassador of Power around the country, that would be a big help as well. So we can send Chris and Ambassador of Power out. That'll help to mobilize support, educate the public very effectively.
I totally agree, and I think we could probably put her remarks up on the webpage. So, yes, Herb.
Yeah, Chris, again, thank you so much. You gave us the first 3 chapters of your lecture, and I wondered if, because we have a little time, you might share some ideas about your vision, because I'm not sure we're going to hear you again unless there's another occasion.
Well, you're actually going to hear from me a little bit at the business session at 4 o'clock. So we do have some specifics about great opportunities in the year ahead, things that we discussed at the steering committee last night. So I'll just hold that till 4 o'clock. But thank you for raising it.
Yes.
Yes, my name is Stephen Fisher. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris about what he said about the vision which was taken since 1945 about to succeed the generation from the scourge of war. So my question, I would like to ask about the civil war, which are everywhere around the world. And that war is very cold, and he said that and take a long time. So if you can think also about that one, which can also lead to the scourge of war, which is about the goals of UN. That is my question.
No, and if I'm understanding your question right, it's about what can the UN do to address civil conflicts and resolve them, as well as parachuting in with peacekeepers to kind of hold the line to keep atrocity from happening. Am I understanding it? And this is a great thing. This is actually something that in our advocacy survey, one of the responses came back that we are passionately committed to peacekeeping, and we have to be as a result of what the ambassador said. But that's not all that the UN does in the peace space. We have the Peace Building Commission, which plays a role in investing programmatically in resolving the kind of seeds of conflict and creating pathways to better outcomes in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have the special representatives of the Secretary General. We have the special rapporteurs on the human rights side. We need to be connected to all those things. And we as an association have great opportunities to grow in that as we still hold the line on peacekeeping. So it's a great question.
Yes. And I don't know if we have a functioning mic. Oh, Troy's to the rescue, yeah.
Good morning. Tina Banks with the Houston chapter and new to the steering committee. What I wanted to do was just give a word of thank you to Chris, but specifically to the UNA. Among the membership here are people who are from countries that have been directly affected by the work of the UNA. I know my sister here is from the Congo, so if she could stand up, we have Nigeria, and certainly we're working on the Boko Haram issue. I'm from Liberia, and we felt the direct impact of the UNA. And so as we reach out in membership, that is a group that can come into the UNA as people from countries who have been directly affected.
It's a wonderful comment. And the diaspora is among us everywhere. Yes, thank you. Over here, yes, Carl?
Yeah, Carl Mars, Orange County Chapter, California.
Again, Chris, thank you so much for this wonderful remark that you said. I'd like to be with the other speakers in congratulating you. I guess it's a question and a comment I have for you. It's why can't you and Ambassador Pickering and Peter Yo be on national television commenting on all the bad things that are said about the United Nations and also commenting about the United Nations Association? One of the problems we have in Southern California and probably in a lot of other parts of the country is nobody's ever heard of the United Nations Association. And one of the things you can do with your speaking ability is to talk us up, let people know we exist. It would be a big help.
Well, it's a wonderful suggestion, and Peter Yo is on TV, maybe not as much as he'd like to be, but he's been on MSNBC, a number of other networks. I've been on the Global Connections TV program that we're very proud of in the UNA universe. But you're exactly right. We need to find, whether it's myself, whether it's Ambassador Pickering with his absolutely, there's no better public diplomat of his generation. Any opportunity we have to have him in front of a camera is a great thing. But I appreciate your advice there. Thank you, and would look forward to it.
Yes, over here.
Good morning. I'm Albert Salosa from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a proud lifetime member of the UNA. Way back in the 1980s, the United Nations had received real great frontal attacks from the ambassador to the UN and the deputy ambassador to the UN. If you remember, it's like the UN out of the US. And during those days, as UNA members, we received responses to attacks in the media about the UN. And so I would like to suggest that the national organization help us by sending responses. And this would be helpful for us in a movement that we'd like us to spread so that we can respond in all our areas. As you know, our job is tough in Arizona, and Sue Ward here knows about that, and we've been involved for a number of years. So thank you very much for your inspiring talk.
Yes?
I'm Tatiana Androsov from Dallas, Texas. Also, in the latest crisis, I'm half Ukrainian, I'm part Ukrainian, part Russian, and part Bulgarian, all from the area of the Crimea and the Ukraine, which is going up in we don't know what. But I wanted to say, not only should Samantha Powers be coming to different places in the United States. Remember, we have our politics and our divisions, and she represents a certain type of politics and divisions. I think what we should try to do is also get the Secretary General and Deputy Secretary, the Deputy Secretary General, and other people who are in the United Nations to come to the different parts of the United States, because I think they travel all over the world, but one of the greatest supporters of the United Nations, in spite of the fact that we do not support as much as we could, is the United States. I was in the Cambodian mission in the early 1990s, and I will tell you, everybody thought that it was Japan that was supplying. It was Japan that was supplying most of the money for the Cambodian mission, but it was the United States. So one of the things we don't do and the UN doesn't do is show how much we mean to them. They should travel throughout the United States too. Thank you.
Good comment. Mel?
See if we can keep this microphone from exploding. On I'm Mel Boynton from Southern California, Pomona Valley chapter. I want to thank Chris for wonderful remarks this morning. And both Chris and Samantha Power, no S on Power, Samantha Power and Chris Watley gave us excellent examples of storytelling. And as we meet with our members of Congress, as we recruit members in our local community, I hope we can also follow their excellent example and tell the story of the Central African Republic and these refugee camps where these things are happening, and that we believe in young people, we believe in world peace, and we tell a story that's compelling. And I think that connects better. I'm told by political sages like her that that's the best way to make their case. So thank you again, Chris, and thanks to Samantha Power.
And part of our UNA story is that Mel is the vice chair of the CCR. So, yes, in the back, yeah.
Hi, my name is Mona Kazim Shah. I'm from Dallas. I'm a journalist and I have a local show that deals with Pakistani politics out of Dallas. My question is that since I've been involved in the whole political scene in Pakistan and the religious minority issues and the genocide that's going on in Pakistan, I was just wondering if there's a way that we could network with other UNA USA members who are interested in the same sort of movement, or if there is a platform that I could use, because I have some great stories that do not get published in Pakistan because of the censorship on media, and also threats that I also received today in Dallas via Facebook, email, phone, whatever. So is there a platform, A, and second, the networking opportunities that I'm sure that there are other people who are concerned about these issues back home? Thank you.
Well, I'll give an unedited response, and that is that we are in the process through the steering committee, working with the staff, trying to identify various kinds of what we call affinity groups. And we have an affinity group on UNA women. It was really important. I don't know why that did it to me. And here in front of me, John is organizing an affinity group on UN retirees. And as I spoke this morning with Ray Friday, you two should talk because working through the credit union, that's another affinity group. And it's possible that we could identify through our chapters and our networks that there are other people who have a common concern about the news from that region that's not being projected. And so these are the kinds of ideas that we will be discussing tonight at the steering committee, and thank you for raising it.